As with other things near the city of Aswan, the only practical way to get to the ruins of Philae is by boat, just a 15-minute ride across the reservoir of the Aswan Low Dam, not to be confused with Lake Nasser.
That dam you see in the background is the Aswan Low Dam, completed in 1912. And as we'll learn, is the reason the Philae temple is located where it is today. So we're not at the ferry landing yet, but as you can see from the water, this is a spectacular place.
Nobody have this technique.
Well, we've arrived at Philae on its island. It's later in the day, so there are lots of people here. Unable to arrange things to get here early this morning, which is probably the best time to come if you want the place more or less to yourself. There are two aspects of this place that make it most interesting. There's its importance in ancient Egypt, obviously, but in modern times, there's also an incredible preservation story related to this temple. This temple complex dates to 2 to 3 centuries before Christ, but originally it wasn't on this island. Everything you see here was painstakingly moved here between 1977 and 1980 as part of an international effort to save it from degradation by flooding ever since the Aswan Dam, the lower dam, was completed in 1912. That's after more than 6 decades in which these buildings in their original location were being damaged during the summer months when the dam's gates were opened. The buildings were remarkably preserved since ancient times, but with each inundation came more harm until by the 1960s, the buildings were submerged up to 1/3 of their height year-round. That's when UNESCO began the project to carefully measure every piece of this ancient temple complex, and nearly 2 decades later, literally moved the temple complex piece by piece to where it rests today, with the exact layout intact. This is a tremendous place to visit for the scenery alone, looking out over a reservoir that almost resembles the Mediterranean itself. These beautiful hills, the water inundated up to where the dam allows it, peppered with islands, some of which stick up above it like this one most prominently, filled with wonderful antiquities sites. Philae, despite its great importance in ancient times, is a small site, measuring only about 1,250 feet by 390 feet in size. The most important and ostentatious building in this temple complex is the Temple of Isis, which you see behind me. And it was for the worship of Isis principally that this complex was constructed. It is entered through a gateway that was built a bit later by Ptolemy II, starting in about 80 BC. On this outer wall of the entrance, you can clearly see the figure of Ptolemy on the left-hand side of the wall, raising his arms against Egypt's enemies. I've stepped inside this cavernous temple, the Isis temple. It's really remarkable, not only to think about it exactly as it was more than 2,000 years ago, but I'm also thinking of just the incredible feat of preserving and restoring this place through a complete move from its original location. Some of these passageways are actually very dark. I've entered one, and I can see, although you can't on video, there's nothing changed about the walls. They're all in intricate detail. Just a little ante-room that leads back out into one of the main rooms. I've just entered the sanctuary of this temple with a stone altar in its center. It's not a very big room, And of course it's a popular place for people to duck into. What's so incredible about the interior is, of course, the hieroglyphics and the larger drawings engraved into these stones from floor to ceiling. The ceilings, I'm taking a wild guess now, look to be 40 feet, maybe taller. The walls are completely covered with figures from Egyptian mythology. This temple, in its original location, was not well protected. In fact, it wasn't protected at all. And that's why on some of these stones, you can see what amounts to graffiti. There's a stone a little high up as you enter the inner courtyard of the Temple of Isis that has the date, I believe, 1829 on it, and some sort of inscription. The structures on this temple complex were, of course, built at different times, and they reflect not only Greek but Roman influence. An example of the temple behind me, the smaller temple, was built by Augustus Caesar, the Roman emperor, in about 30 BC and thereafter. It was never finished. Looking up at these walls, it makes you wonder what this place would have looked like had it been completed. In Egyptian mythology, even though Isis was perhaps the more powerful god, this place became more important eventually, primarily because of Osiris and the fact that Philae was said to be a burial site for Osiris. This place became more wrapped up in the fear and superstition that accompanied the religious practice of the day. For Osiris was deemed to be the judge and lord of the dead and the underworld, the so-called Lord of Silence, going back to 2500 BC. For that reason, Philae was revered both by the Egyptians to the north and the Nubians, which the ancient Greeks referred to as Ethiopians, to the south. Only those of the priestly class could live at this temple. And it is said that not even birds would fly over the temple, and that no fish swimming in the Nile would approach its shores. There were other centers associated with ancient Philae where trade and commerce occurred, centers that sadly were inundated once the first dam was built here. But thanks to technology and the international will to save it, this remarkable place still exists.